The wave rose. The world narrowed to a bright hinge, cable, hook, the exact distance between Tom's hand and the metal that would make him safe. In the headset, Kez's voice was a wire. Fuel at bingo. You have one, and then the sky tilted. Rotor wash slammed into rain and salt in a single hot fist, and everything went white. The whiteness was not empty. It had weight. It had sound. A high keen, as if the sea had put a finger in Hawk's ear and rung his skull like a bell. He felt the cable go slack against his chest, the harness bite the meat of his ribs, the boat fall away, the air fill the gap like a greedy landlord. For the width of a heartbeat, he had Tom's shoulder under his palm. Then the wave picked them both up and shook them clean of sense. Darkness flickered in at the edges like birds. Hawk's body chose for him. He went long, not fighting, mouth clamped, hand on the hook, because the hook is the hinge and everything else is weather. The swell shouldered him under, green-black, cold like an old argument, then lifted him into a world with color again. The helicopter's light stuttered across the surface, found him, lost him, found him. He spun, saw the Trevelyan's bow stand up against the wrong piece of sky, saw the cable kick, saw Tom. Tom fell wrong. Not like a diver, like a dropped tool. Hawk reached and missed. The cable sang a note no engineer designs for. It stuttered, recovered, stuttered again, then let go with a sound like a bone turning into a story. The hook shot upward. Tom hit the water flat. Hawk was already moving, the harness digging into the sore ankle where the deck rope had tried to keep him earlier and failed. He took 3 strokes and then 3 more, and Tom was there, eyes open and surprised and very far away. "I have you," Hawk said, the words a habit and a prayer. He rolled him, found the line of jaw, found the mast strap with numb fingers, cleared his mouth with a sweep the medics would have nodded at, felt for the rise and fall of a chest in a sea that was all rise and fall. Nothing. Then a small hitch that could have been hope or a wave. He clipped the strop by touch, 1, 2, clean, flagged the lift with his free hand. Above, Kez swore once, a single syllable with years in it. Then, "I have you, I have you. Hold him steady, good boy, hold him steady." The winch took weight. The sea tried to argue. The winch did what it was built to do. Hawk kept Tom's face out of the water with the stubbornness of a man who has refused bigger things. The cabin rose toward them like a lit room in a bad dream. Hands reached, pulled, folded them into the orange belly that was noise and light and heat and not enough. Hawk began the work he had done in drills and in classrooms and in imagination. He did not look at Tom's face yet. He cut the helmet strap, swept the mouth again, sealed his own against it, breathed. Compressions. Count them. The numbers, a metronome that belongs to the living. Kez was a shape at his shoulder. Steph's voice, a constant line in the world's torn fabric. Hold for 10. We are inbound. We are running the air the way it was designed to be run. Hold for 10. You have 20 seconds. Then I want you strapped. We will bring him in hot. Hawk breathed for Tom. He pushed the heart that had made jokes about instant mash and filed a burr from a hook on his day off and knocked the side of Hawk's helmet the first day they worked a line together. He pushed and counted, and the numbers became a place he could stand. The cabin light made Tom's skin an unkind color. The salt gave everything the taste of old coins. At the 2-minute mark, Kez put a hand flat on Hawk's shoulder, not to stop him, to borrow balance. Steph brought the machine lower over black water and cliff, voices on the radio stepping out of her way, because when a pilot talks like that, You make a lane in the air for her. Hawk breathed again, compressions again. He felt something kick against his fingers, a ghost of a pulse or a snarl of a wave through the deck. Could not tell, would not decide that way. The runway's edge lights appeared like a necklace laid on a table. A waiting ambulance was a block of white under sodium. The helicopter settled into the idea of ground. The doors opened on wet night, and men in yellow came into the cabin with professionalism that is its own kind of kindness. Hawk did not want to let go. He did, because he knew what being useful looks like. The paramedic took one look at the monitor and gave a nod that was very small. They moved, a choreography learned in rooms that smell of antiseptic and grief. Hawk followed to the threshold and could not make his feet behave after that. He watched the stretcher go down the helicopter steps into a wind that was suddenly without purpose. In the corridor that has heard every kind of breathing, Asher's colleagues worked as if the clock might be persuaded. Hawk stood with salt drying on his neck and hands he did not immediately recognize as his own. Kez stayed beside him for a minute, said nothing, then went to sign a piece of paper because paperwork is the lid that keeps a day from spilling into the next one. Hawk watched a wall clock make the cruel sounds clocks make on nights like this. He noticed absurdly that someone had left a poster about flu jabs slightly crooked. He reached to straighten it and did not. A woman came down the corridor briskly and then slowed when she saw him. She had a registrar's badge and the expression of someone who knows what to say and will choose not to say it. She told him the news with professional simplicity. It entered his chest like water poured into a boat that has already decided to sink. He sat on a bench meant for shoes. Somewhere far away, a machine stopped making the noise it makes to reassure the living. He put his elbows on his knees and his head in his hands and found that his body had stored a breath for this moment and now spent it. His mouth made a sound he would not have recognized as his if he had been another man in the corridor. He closed it on the next sound and swallowed it for later. Steph appeared as if she had walked out of a different film and been given the wrong script. Helmet under one arm, hair wet at the nape, eyes wrong. She looked at him and he stood, and she put a hand on the back of his neck and leaned her forehead against his for a second that contained more than most hours. "I am sorry," she said, and did not try to be original with it. He nodded. He did not trust that his head would stop if he began to shake it side to side. He breathed as if McCrae were somewhere in the pool shed, saying 4 in, 4 out, and remember your hands, lad. Remember your hands. They walked out into rain that had remembered how to be gentle. The helicopter sat on the pad with its lights dim. A big animal with its head down. Hawk stood with Steph just beyond the rotor arc and watched as if something might announce itself. It did not. He did not sleep. The base smelled of wet neoprene and tea that had been poured and forgotten. The locker room was an inventory of absence. Tom's peg had a smear where his harness had hung. Hawk put his hand there and then took it away quickly, as if he had touched a hob and remembered fire late. Elsie called him in the morning because news like this travels faster than weather. He did not tell her the details. She did not ask. She said, "I am here," and he said, "I know," and they each put a piece of the other's day in a pocket and carried it around like a talisman that does nothing but weighs right. The report came quicker than he had expected. It was not unkind. It had diagrams. It had language that makes sense of a thing until you try to hold it at night. It said the cable had failed at a point no one could predict, that salt had reached where it should not have, that maintenance schedules had been kept, that men who built machines are clever and men who use them are brave, and sometimes the world still ends a way no one ordered. Hawk read it once and folded it neatly and put it in a drawer he did not open again. For a week, he moved through days like a diver through silt. He ate because Steph put a bowl under his nose and raised an eyebrow. He showered because he could not stand his own smell, salt and oil, and something older. He sat in the crew room and stared at the small hawk someone had carved under the bench lip after a different death, a quiet superstition that mostly catches on sleeves. When the page sounded again in the second week, he went without thinking. The sea does not leave slots for your personal tragedies on the schedule. A kayaker lost his nerve off-prow in a cross-chop, and Hawk's hands remembered their education. The body is clever. He took a line and a voice and a breath and came home with a man who would go to bed that night with a story and a wife who would press her face into his ear and close her eyes. Back on the pad, Steph thumbed the comms to cold and turned her head just enough to see him without seeing him. He held up 2 fingers, the crew sign for OK with a bit of still shaking. She nodded and looked straight ahead again. When they shut down, she did not speak until he took his helmet off, and then she said, "Clean work," and he said, "That will do." They ate curry from white boxes and left them open on the table because the smell fills the room in a way grief cannot. Steph told a story about a man who had tried to bring a parrot to a medical. Hawk laughed once at the right place. She put a hand on his wrist and left it there long enough for a blood vessel to decide which way it wanted to go. They started to orbit each other the way people do who have been given the same wound by the same day. It was not planned. There was no announcement, no champagne. There was a pair of mugs by his sink that matched by accident, and then, on purpose. There was the sound of her toothbrush in his bathroom and the odd little lift in his chest at that humility. There was a night where the rain came in off the bay and flattened the world, and they lay on his narrow bed and did not sleep and did not speak for an hour and then spoke for 3. The soft, dangerous talk that puts roots in dirt you had not meant to plant in. He told her the small things, because the big ones are often just small ones in a louder room. The way Tom whistled tuneless when he laid a cable just right. The way the Trevelyan's deck had smelled of diesel and fear. The way the weight of the hook in his palm had felt like a letter from an old friend. She told him about a training flight over a moor where the sky had gone from grey to religion in a minute, and she had understood that she would never be bored properly again. She told him about a school teacher who had said girls do not become pilots in this country, and how she had written his name on a bit of paper and folded it into the lining of her helmet and flown very well indeed ever since. She told him about a boy who had drowned in a pond in Wales when she was 14, and how she had not been able to stand the sound of still water for a year after, and how helicopters are the opposite of ponds. They held one another as if both were holding a third thing that was heavier. They moved around the base with a new care in their ankles, the caution of people who would like the day to be kind, and no, it will not be. The first time she pulled away, it was not visible. It was a pause after his name, a glance past him at a window he had not noticed. The fourth time, it was a whole sentence. "I cannot," she said at his table, the mug making a ring on the wood he could trace for years if he let himself. "I cannot do this and do that. Every time you run toward the edge of the map, I can feel my ribcage check its lease. I am not made of the right material for this love." He wanted to say, neither am I, and we will make a new material between us. He wanted to say, the sea took a man from me, and I will not give it you. He wanted to say, I will stop going. He did not. He took a breath and counted to 4. He nodded. He said, you are brave enough to leave, and that is a different bravery from the one we sell in posters. She cried then, not loudly, not for long. She put her hand on his cheek, and he leaned into it, because if you are going to put something down, you should use all of it first. She told him she had a transfer north, that the world needs helicopters in other skies too. He said, of course, because he is a courteous man, even when the floor has turned into a boat under his feet. The morning she left, the wind was easterly, so the runway noise went toward the town, and mothers looked up from prams to say, that will be them then. She stood in the hangar and looked around carefully, as if there might be something she had dropped and would be sorry about later. She put her hand flat on the helicopter's nose cone, as if checking a child for a fever. She kissed Hawk once, not like a goodbye, like a good decision, and then she was gone. Not dramatically, just through a door that men had painted badly 10 years ago and never fixed. He stood where she had been until Kez said, that is enough of that, and put a mug in his hand, and a form on the table, and a pen on the form, and the day continued, because the day always does. The calls came in the ordinary rhythm, kind, cruel, dull. A pleasure boat misjudged a sandbar and decided to call it learning. A man with a beautiful dog tried to jump from a bad place and was talked down by 2 strangers and an officer with a voice that had been stereotyped as unfriendly. A freighter put a yeoman down a ladder into a swell that made nonsense of ladders, and he returned with a bruised shin and a story, and you will not believe this, mate, but we saw a sunfish as big as a van. Hawk trained a new lad, tall, nervous, good hands. The boy tied a figure-8 knot as if writing his name, and Hawk nodded, felt something like a door open on a room he had once owned and rented out. He knocked his helmet with a gloved knuckle before their first winch off the Silonian's wake. 1 tap, not hard. Breathe, he said. 4 in, 4 out. It makes you look like you know what you are doing, even if your insides are a choir. The lad grinned, young enough to be insulted by fear, and filed the advice where useful things live. The summer pretended to arrive. The sea put on its flat face and still moved underneath, like always. Hawk found that he could laugh in a complete way and not feel disloyal. He found that the first 10 minutes after the page sounded were not the length of his whole life anymore. He found that he could stand by the window where the kettle is and look at the picture of Tom without wanting to edit it with a bottle. The rescue that redeemed nothing and everything came on a morning that would not have been worth mentioning if you were not looking for it. 2 paddleboarders off Sennen. Wind more than they had thought. Tide more than the wind. The canvas of the day, slight and agreeable. The pilot was not Steph. He was a lad with a careful moustache and a respect for checklists that made Hawk like him. They lifted. The boards were white dashes in blue. The teenagers were doing exactly what you tell them to do in posters, which is rare and glorious. Hawk dropped into water that was a different ocean from the one that had thrown him at a hull and reached into his chest. He clipped one, then the other, strop, signal, lift. The movement's a phrase he knew how to say and mean. Back in the cabin, the girl clung to his forearm as if it were an argument she had won. You are like a superhero, she said, and Hawk made the face men make when they suspect they have been mistaken for someone else. Nah, delivery man, he said, and she laughed. in the way that turns an hour into a day. They set them down into the warm arms of their embarrassment, and a paramedic with very clean boots. The mothers cried in a way that makes your own throat hot. Hawk looked at the horizon and found that it looked like a straight line from here, and that was fine. The trick is to remember that it is not when you are out there. He walked back to the crew room, and the kettle served its purpose. He lifted it and poured water over leaves that had met better water before. He looked at the shelf, and there was that frame, the one with Tom's grin, and his own earnest surprise at having been caught by a camera, the sea behind them pretending to be innocent. Hawk touched the frame once, a habit he had decided was not a superstition, but an agreement. The phone rang. Cares answered, made the face of a man who has been told he is handsome by a stranger, said, "Aye, we will look," and put it down. "What?" Hawk said. "False alarm," Kez said. "Kayak thought it was a shark, was a bin bag. The sea is full of our mistakes. Fancy a biscuit." Hawk took the biscuit, dunked it, ate it too fast. He thought of Steph, somewhere under another sky, flying another machine into a different argument. He did not ache the way he had expected to. He felt the gentle ache you get after running a lap and sitting down the right way. He walked to the open hangar door. The breeze came in, kind. The runway lay like a promise they had met and would meet again. A gull said something rude about boats. Out over Mounts Bay, the water shone the color of new metal. An old man in a flat cap watched from the fence and lifted 2 fingers at the crew in blessing or superstition, or both. Hawk lifted his hand back. He stood for a long minute, then another, in the simple knowledge that the sea remembers, and so do the people who borrow it for work. He breathed in for 4, out for 4, not because he needed to be clever, but because it felt correct, like putting a rope back in a coil so it will behave in the dark. Behind him, the new lad clattered a mug and swore because the ring he had made on the table would not wipe. Hawk turned and said, "Under the sink, left, the stuff in the green bottle," and the lad looked at him as if he were a magician who knew where everything is in a house. He laughed, the laugh he had before and after and in between. The page sounded again, because the page always does. Small yacht with a fouled prop off longships, 2 aboard, no drama yet, and let us keep it that way. Hawk reached for his harness and did it up without looking. He knocked the new lad's helmet once, lightly, and saw in the boy's eyes that the ritual had landed. He walked to the machine that lets men visit that old water and not belong to it quite. He clipped himself where the hook belongs, front of the waist, buckle correct, lines neat. As the rotors took hold and the floor decided it was bored of being floor, Hawk felt the quiet he had been looking for since a day on a headland a long time ago when he promised an old piece of rope a career. Peace is not the absence of weather. It is a place to stand while it happens. He had found it, not large, but enough for 2 boots. They lifted into the honest air. The sea lay out its argument, and he went to meet it, not to win, just to take his share of the living from it and carry it home. Somewhere, in a later day, a young man with a paramedic's hands would sit in this aircraft under a red light, and Hawk would knock his helmet and say, "Breathe, 4 in, 4 out, nobody is keeping score." Somewhere, in a different later day, a cable would snap, and a picture frame would weigh more than glass. All of that was true. None of it was now. Now was a simple job, a straight line, a small mercy. Hawk leaned into the harness and smiled the small, private smile of a man who knows his purpose and has accepted the cost. The machine relented from the ground. The sky opened its door. Mounts Bay turned its face up to see them off, old, indifferent, and, in its way, kind.